have to say off the bat that I am thrilled that this many people want to come and hear us talk about curriculum today. My name is Mike McGee. I lead an organization called Chiefs for Change, which has 37 members who are urban school superintendents and state education chiefs around the country, serving about 7.5 million kids. And we're going to have a great opportunity today to talk about the importance of curriculum and aligned professional learning in our schools and classrooms. I'm sure many of you, like those of us on this panel, have been working hard over the last handful of years to dramatically improve standards across the country. And the truth is that in most of our states, standards have dramatically improved. But we are still a very far cry from a goal of having challenging, rich, engaging, relevant curriculum for all students in all classrooms, in all subject areas. So today we're going to get a chance to talk to our panelists about some of the most promising work that they're participating in and seeing across the country, about some of the challenges we still face and how to overcome them, try to be very results-oriented and positive about the efforts that are happening and where we go from here. I can't imagine a better panel to talk about this issue than the one that we have, so we're all very lucky. Kunjan Naranchania is the CEO of the Louisiana Recovery School District, doing some of, I think, the most exciting policy work and work in practice on this issue in the country. Thank you, Kunjan. David Steiner is the executive director of the Institute for Education Policy at Johns Hopkins University. David Hardy is the superintendent of Lorraine City Public Schools in Ohio, and Rob Waldron is the CEO of Curriculum Associates. So thank you all very much for getting here. I know some of us had to jump through a lot of hoops to make it to the panel today. I wanted to start by asking each of you why you've chosen curriculum as a real lever for change in improving learning for students, and how in particular you're working on that challenge in your role. Kunjan, would you start for us?
Yeah, sure. Per Mike, your point, standards have changed a lot. They have changed pretty dramatically in the last 5 years, in some cases sort of for a shorter or longer period of time. But if you just think about sort of like, let's just take a basic math problem. 10 years ago, kids were solving the math problem 5 divided by 1/4. That's the math problem I solved when I was a kid. You know how to do that. You multiply, flip the fraction, you get 20. But kids are now being asked, create a story and a visual representation to solve the problem 5 divided by 1/4. That is a much more complicated problem. It requires you to understand conceptually what division is. It requires you to understand the difference between fractions and whole numbers. And it requires you to have a sort of reasoned representation of the answer to that problem. And in order for a teacher to be prepared to get a student to be successful on that more difficult problem, she needs support in figuring out how to scaffold information to get the student prepared to solve that more complex, challenging problem. And I think without a curriculum, without access to the highest quality materials our country has to offer, we are not setting up that child to solve that problem effectively, and we are not giving teachers the tools they need in order to help that child solve that problem effectively.
David?
So when I was privileged to serve as Commissioner of Education in New York State, I would go around lots and lots of schools. That's what commissioners are supposed to do. And I was stunned by the differential in what was being taught, depending on the demographics of the school. And this was way before TNTP did its recent report confirming in much more detail what were then anecdotal impressions, but impressions that were backed up over and over again. We are teaching down to children and then staying at whatever level they are too often. It turns out that when teachers of underprivileged children get rigorous curriculum, they water it down. And so I was convinced that what we teach matters tremendously. This is backed up by OECD research that shows tremendously high quality curriculum in highest performing countries and city-states. But at the same time, after we launched Engage New York and began to look at what was happening across the country, it became clear that you can't just parachute curriculum into schools and leave it at that. And that's really the most recent research on math curriculum has confirmed this. It turns out as a country, we give teachers about 1 day a year of PD on brand new material. In Hong Kong, they spend 45% of an average week, right, working with each other on materials and how to implement. So for us, the key question now is how to make what you teach and how effectively you teach it not two different questions, but one issue, and how to persuade districts and schools that they're going to require a joint team approach to actually help take advantage of the tools. We've all had brand new flashy tools given to us and we just don't use them, right? Because we can't learn, no one helped us. And I think the sort of 2.0 lesson for us is it's not good enough to just upgrade the curriculum, theoretically, because many, many teachers just aren't using them. And it's not their fault, it's on all of us to try to get inside the systems and see how the culture can be shifted to support this huge transition.
David, what's your experience been?
Yeah, so it's interesting. On my flight over here to San Diego, I happened to be sitting in a Starbucks and overheard a conversation between a teacher. It was early in the morning, a teacher and another person. And as soon as you hear education jargon, your ears kind of park up a little bit, right? Like, what are they talking about? So I'm listening to this conversation, and this gentleman has a box of materials, rubber bands, and other things that are in front of him, explaining what he was doing to whoever he was talking to about creating his lesson for the day. So again, 6 something in the morning, creating his lesson for later in the day. The conversation led to this question of, what percentage of kids do you believe come to school to learn? And to hear this teacher articulate that they believe that only 10% of his students that come to school every single day come to learn sent a couple different messages to me. One, how are we helping our teachers understand what our kids really need to be successful? Because there's a reason why he said 10%. It's probably because when they come to his class, they are checking out. They're not invested. They are deciding to take other choices in class versus learning because what is in front of them is not meaningful, relevant, or rigorous. The second piece is there is a mindset around what our kids are able to do that needs to be adjusted or addressed as we are introducing new curriculum, right? So to the parachuting idea, I mean, I think that's absolutely right. That's what's going on. We drop in curriculum, and usually this happens as superintendents turn over, right? You get a new superintendent, you get a new curriculum, that superintendent goes out, and then the mindset amongst teachers is this too shall pass, right?
Yes, exactly.
And so to change that, we have to ensure that the material that we're putting in front of our teachers and ultimately our kids is strong, but helping our teachers understand how to utilize that material to engage and to ensure our kids get what they need.
Rob, you're developing curriculum. How are you getting at this problem?
So first of all, I just want to disclose that I will be the most boring person on the panel with all these accomplished people. But thank you. Yeah, so I think the reason I came, I used to run a nonprofit that called Jumpstart that worked with 3 to 5-year-old children around the country, and I've always been interested, that's an example of, it's not a curriculum, but it's an example of what we need there is more adults to serve children in Head Starts and other places. We don't have the right ratio, and it's it's too bad this is being filmed, but like a distribution problem. Like, how am I going to bring more adults to solve the problem? And so I've always been super fascinated by, like, this is not cancer. Like, we need to find a cure. The work that people in Louisiana done, that David has done, and John Hopkins are showing the way in the Engage New York course, showing the way of like something that is great, yet greatness in the last mile getting there is failing. So while we're known as a curriculum company and so forth, I'm super engaged in like, why is it that it can't be distributed again and again to millions of people? Like, why? What's the, and again, I'm sorry I'm being boring, but like, what's the operating problem to have that happen? And so I've found that there, having been involved in technology for a long time, that there's a bunch of technical solutions that make it easier. There's a bunch of service things that can happen, having like people embedded in the districts who are employed by you but embedded in the districts. Like, we have 9 full-time people in Miami-Dade. And and like trying to solve what is a very thorny operating problem of things we know to do. And people can fight about which, their recipe. We're going to have data about those recipes to decide and help with those fights. But like, I've just been super engaged and fascinated for a long time trying to solve that problem of getting great all the way through to the system in a very complicated world. And we stink at it. We just happen to be better than all the competition. So, it's still an uncooked thing that we all have to get better at, and that's why I do what I do.
At Chiefs for Change, we've been looking very closely at the issue of teacher leadership and how to use state policy in particular to support teacher leaders. Do you all think that's a piece of the puzzle? I'm curious about this question of how to align professional learning to high quality instructional materials and the role that teacher leaders and other well-trained professionals in schools can play in improving that alignment. Kunjan?
Yeah, sure. And I didn't answer the second part of your question. What are we trying to get done in Louisiana? We're trying to put every kid on a path to the middle class, and we want to make sure that practically every day kids have access to the highest quality materials our country has to offer, and teachers are trained on how to use those materials and supported. And teacher leadership is one of the most integral pieces to making that true, right? So when we first identified high quality materials, our teachers did that. We had committees of teachers who had been trained by folks who are colleagues of David and David himself on what makes good curriculum. And they themselves said to their districts and said to the state legislature, this is the type of material we want, and this is the type of training we want. And they are the ones that have carried the water for us. They continue to be integral inside the school building because they're the ones that get all of the other teachers invested and on board. And so we continue to cultivate that relationship with our teacher leaders. We have 6,000 identified teacher leaders in Louisiana that we work with. We train them on a yearly basis, and they are our ambassadors for this work all over the state.
So they should be critically important, and they are critically important. But here's the issue. We have 1,380, give or take, really bad ed schools in this country. And it's not their fault because they've been trying to prepare teachers to teach nothing in particular, which is extremely difficult to do. Instead of being able, as in other countries, to teach teachers how to use particular curriculum. Louisiana is the first state where that could change because so many teachers are using the same one. But we've got a mindset here that the authentic teacher is creating her own curriculum. That runs very deep. It starts in the ed schools, it continues into professional life, understandably. This is like saying to Meryl Streep, you should be writing your script, right? She doesn't want to write her script. She wants the best script to enact and then to adapt, right? And then to make her own. When you actually survey teachers, and we've done this to help district leaders who are reluctant to do top-down reform, which is understandable, we surveyed teachers. High percentages of them are very dissatisfied with bad curriculum. They know it. And they actually privately, confidentially want good curriculum. This is sort of the unspoken secret. But meanwhile, an entire national ideology says that's not authentic, right? So teacher leaders are crucial in part because they can help overcome that inbuilt ideological bias against a really good curriculum. And just to be clear, no, it's not perfect for every child. It's a starting point. It's a ground level. It's not the ceiling. Great teachers will take a great curriculum and truly make it better. But we have on average 94, this is RAND data, 94% of our teachers pulling off Pinterest, pulling off Google, pulling off Teachers Pay Teachers the night before. And what's deeply tragic, and I'll stop with this, is no one's helped them do that. Even if it were a good idea, which it isn't, no one has prepared them for that skill set. And so children get what is done by untrained teachers grabbing at stuff and trying to make a curriculum.
David, does that resonate with your experience leading Lorraine schools?
It does. It does. So
Oh dear.
it sounds like yesterday. No, I think the experience that I'm having in Lorraine, just to give you 30 seconds of context, it is a state takeover district of about 6,500 kids across 14 school buildings. that's supported by legislation to come in and change the academic practices in a district that's the second lowest performing in the state. I have 1% of my kids that are graduating college ready. So out of a graduating class of almost 500, I have about 15 that are ready for the world after high school, right? So to give you context, I'm coming into this space with a target already on my back of here comes the state telling me what to do, right? I'm not from Lorraine. So just that ramification. So the idea of coming in as a district leader under a new legislation to say, here's what you need to do, is not going to be received very well. And lo and behold, I made the mistake and said, oh, they'll love it, right? And the reality of the situation, when we think about us as humans, right, we're more apt to listen to our neighbor, more apt to listen to a recommendation from a friend than from someone else. I think of my own kids, right? I could tell my 5-year-old what to do, but if his little brother says, actually, this is a better idea, he's going to listen to his brother. And our kids and adults, we're the same way. So if we have teacher leaders who are empowered to bring curriculum to classrooms, bring curriculum to learning spaces, it's more apt to be adapted and bought in by their peers because of the energy from the collective colleague that they have in bring in this curriculum. So what we've done in Lorraine, and again, year 1, we did not do this. Year 2, the learned lesson was bringing voices that are closest to the work to the table to determine what we need to do. We established something called TEAM, which is our Teacher Executive Advisory Network of teachers who opted in to be a part of a team that says, hey, we as a district do not have all the answers. They're not going to come from me, but they are going to come from you, and we need your voice to decide our direction. And through TEAM, they have identified key areas in which we need to push as a district, have given us feedback on our approach, and are more of our voices in our school buildings on how we need to approach bringing a new curriculum and everything else. So I think that shift in mindset of the district or the state being the only voice that can provide answers is something we're pushing on. And by having TEAM, we've established that.
Rob, what have you been learning about this issue of professional learning in schools and how to successfully support teachers to implement high-quality curriculum?
Yeah, I think the key is not, sometimes people talk about, well, you need professional development, so that's definitively true, but people aren't thinking about an entire service chain from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, thinking rather than like, yes, you should do the PD day, like that right? So, the real thing is to get people to think about like a chain of sets of things that have to happen. And so the first thing, Michael Horn is running around here, if you know who he is. He wrote a book on innovation education. And, the first question of what is this product hired to do? Getting agreement on like, what are we hired to do? Why did you buy this? Because a lot of times there's not agreement on that, and that's where it starts to dissolve. But the second thing is like, what are you kicking out? Before we start, what are you not doing? Because we've gone to places where we're the 15th reading program, right? And we're like, well, that maybe could bring that down to 14. And so and then the other thing is like, this is the assessment window, this is the PD day, this is when we come back with the data. Like, here's a map of the entire calendar of the year. And being very deliberate. And the other thing is walking. So that was the hardest transition for our company because, like everyone in 2008, everybody almost went bankrupt, and then you're selling the product. And we used to sell the product like, we don't have time for PD, we don't do PD, we're not paying for PD. And we're like, well, we tried, we can't, okay. And now we just refuse to. So if you don't get our service, we're out of there. And I literally, it's nice to be a private company, so I've been in front of a superintendent who I'll leave unnamed with an $800,000 order. And he's like, you're really going to walk. And I'm like, I'm really going to walk because you're going to be in the newspaper for screwing it up. And that means I'll be in the newspaper for screwing it up. And you're going to blame me because you're in the newspaper. Mm-hmm. So I am out of here. But you have to, and to be fair, they're under enormous pressure. They don't have enough money. They're not irrational, right? But anyway, so they're being incredibly deliberate about a set of services that are not just PD. That someone is not calling an 800 number. You're calling Sue. You have her cell phone number. She's there right away. She understands your data, like all the way through service. And I think what's great, and sorry to be talking so long, is that because they subscribe now rather than getting 5-year things, we're screwed if we don't do that. and the industry, right? If you don't renew, we can't afford to do all this. So like we need you to renew, so we have to delight you. And the only way you're going to get delighted is if you get great gains. And there's been a transition in our industry with some of us where we have to deliver greatness for you because we're subscribing. We can't possibly afford to have you leave, so we're going to delight you. And delight only comes if you feel served well and you have student achievement.
I want to stay on this issue for a minute because it was one of the revelations for me about how this world works as I started to learn more over the last couple of years. This issue of the cycle of curriculum adoption and why it's so important. We have states still in the US where the adoption cycles are 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, where the definition of textbook in state law is quite restrictive.
Yeah.
Why are these state laws and policies important if your goal is the adoption of high quality materials that are going to be relevant and engaging for your students?
So my answer is because some of my predecessors, not in our company, were doing dumb, bad things in procurement. And so in order to not, corrupt things where people, your golf partner, you're getting paid off, political donations, all these things. This is more years ago. It happens a little bit still. And because of that, they had to create these very strict rules to make sure nothing ever went wrong. And those strict rules are obscene in a world of technology. So we had 60 versions of our software last year that just get released. And I have states who say, you can't change it because it's been procured. I'm like, well, that's a really dumb idea, right? And it's left over because what would happen is that the textbook company would come in and say they were ready with something, and they weren't, and they got, goosed. And so they made a rule that you couldn't change it to protect themselves. But those rules don't fit anymore, and it needs to change. And they came, again, from a good place to get rid of corruption. But it has to change. It doesn't serve children.
Kunjan, Louisiana has actually taken this on. Can you talk a little bit about what you did as a state in order to address some of these issues in state law and policy?
Yeah, I mean, we similarly had restrictive laws, and laws like the ones you all are describing essentially create monopolies within states. You basically are restricting what districts can buy and making it much easier for them to buy the one product the state has adopted for 7 years. And that product is going to be archaic 1 year in. So essentially, we eliminated our cycles, and what we have is a review process that elevates the best curriculum in the country. We check it with Ed Reports, which is the national standard for what makes high quality curriculum, and we make it easier for districts to buy the materials that are on our Tier 1 list, any of the materials on our Tier 1 list, but they can choose. They can also choose off of our Tier 1 list, and that list is also being updated all the time. When people submit curriculum to us, if we don't think it's good, we put it on the Tier 2 or Tier 3 list. Districts can buy that as well. We don't facilitate the purchase of those materials, but they're there and they can make the choices. But we've essentially eliminated the archaic cycles of adoption and contracting that restrain and constrain most districts in most states.
I mean, in the old days, the 600-page textbook was the 600-page textbook, and there were economic returns to scale on not changing that, right, for a while. It was too expensive, and it gave the monopoly. And now we have OER, Open Educational Resources Online, which can be updated every day if they need to be. So the technology has changed, the quality has changed, but this is a multi-billion-dollar business. And I would say it for you because you can't quite say it perhaps, but in Louisiana, the whole reform, which has been best in the nation in curriculum, was almost lost, not because of teachers, not because of parents or students, but because the publishers went after the state when they did these reforms. And it was, as the Duke of Wellington said about the Battle of Waterloo, it was a damn close run thing.
Not all publishers are one group, so we're not.
Right.
Don't
listen to him.
That never happened. Publishers are not one thing.
Right. I mean,
nor are professors.
Traditional
one
publishers,
thing.
long since. But it is.
Glad I'm here.
It is a challenge because whenever you have deeply invested relationships that often go back many years, it is hard to overcome.
David, what does it look like as a superintendent to have to be making a case for procurement?
Yeah. Well, I think I'm in a current unique situation. So in this role, I have the luxury of the powers of the school board and that of the superintendent. So I'm a little less restricted in those areas. So those things could get done. But I do remember, and some of the things I hear Dave speaking to in Miami, where I was the reading coach, and we would adopt new textbooks, the 600 book textbooks, and they would come in big boxes, and then we would go to our storage room and see unwrapped 600 page textbooks that have not been used with a different color on the cover, and literally the same material inside. So I actually
Wasn't
think
it a sticker?
yeah, it was. They
forgot the sticker.
They changed the sticker. They just made a new cover. But what is interesting, I actually think it helps protect in some ways the uninformed district leader, because there are times in which we as leaders may not know enough about the curricular resources that are available, and therefore we're going to go with the people that come to us. And those folks that come to us, a good or bad or indifferent, may present something that makes sense for us in that moment, and it's a quick decision and we can move on, versus being a smart consumer and coming to a partner who says, you know what, we actually need professional development, this is how we do it. I would love to hear that as a district superintendent, because you're matching exactly what the need is to the outcomes we want to see, and so therefore we have to be smarter as consumers, whereas in years past we didn't have to be.
I want to turn quickly to this issue which we've touched upon around the relevance of curriculum to students. And David, you've had the experience recently of working very closely with Baltimore, which I think is quite an interesting story. Yeah. Can you talk about your partnership with Baltimore City Schools, Sonia Santelises' leadership there, and what their adoption process looked like when they made the decision to try to adopt high quality
So just as
curriculum?
you kindly put the context for, I mean, Baltimore is, with probably St. Louis, certainly Detroit, the three most troubled large city school systems in the United States. What does that mean? It means that last year 10% of African American males were proficient at any grade level. It meant that in 6 schools, not a single student in either ELA or math reached proficiency in any grade level. That is tragic. And we, as an institute at Hopkins, run what we call knowledge maps. We take ELA curriculum, we actually look at the knowledge build if you read all the texts. So we took the Baltimore curriculum, and this is a heat map. You can actually see grade by grade what subject matter is being taught, because the achievement gap in ELA is largely a knowledge gap. We know that from research. And we found out that in Baltimore, 38% of the texts were written by African Americans, which struck us as very reasonable. It's a 90% African American district, and anyway, it should have lots of African American as well as Hispanic texts. Then we found out that 95% of that reading was of African Americans being shot, beaten up, enslaved, right? So, which is a tragic and real part of the African American experience. One reference to the Harlem Renaissance, the great flowering of African American poetry and literature, one reference in 13 years. And I'm just giving you an example. So when we gave this whole report to the superintendent, African American woman, Sonia Santelises, she and her colleagues were so outraged at what was being taught to young people in Baltimore that within 3 weeks, she had issued an RFP for a new curriculum, with teachers completely running, right, as you suggested. They were on the committees, they were looking, and she has since announced a really strong curriculum. She'd already switched in math, but the ELA was done too. And now the challenge is not to have happen what we've seen in so many districts like Baltimore, which is the brand new, much more rigorous, content-rich curriculum bravely being selected, right? Imagine you've got a 10% proficiency. So courage to select a really rigorous curriculum. Now the question is, can we all support the teachers in implementing it? Or will it be the shiny new object that will stay on the shelf?
Kunjan, what do you see when you visit schools in Louisiana in terms of implementation? What are your concerns and how are you addressing them?
Yeah, I mean, just to go back to a point that David was making earlier, We have widespread adoption of high quality curriculum at this point. We've been doing this for 5 years. And when you look at our most challenged schools in the state, our 300 most challenged schools, we have 1,300 schools total. We have 95% of ELA and math classrooms where we walk in and see teachers using high quality materials and students using high quality materials. And that's amazing. That was not the reality in Louisiana 5 years ago. But what we also see is teachers don't get to the most difficult tasks in the lessons. And there's lots of reasons why that is. There's a lot of reasons. But that has really led us to say, gosh, how do we support teachers to learn the curriculum, know how to scaffold within it, and know how to deliver the most complex of the questions? Because this really is an equity issue, as David is saying. This is about ensuring that every student, no matter where they come from, has access to the best materials our country has to offer and are challenged at the level of the grade every day. And if you don't challenge students at the level of the grade, they will never get to the level of the grade. And if we are taking the most complex tasks away from children, they will never achieve at the level the grade demands them to achieve at. And so our entire work next year, with not 300, but we're expanding to 500 of our most struggling schools in the state, is all about teacher support. It is only about teacher support. How do you prepare principals? How do you prepare vendors? We use vendors a lot, as Rob's suggesting, to help support teacher training. How do you embed teacher leaders within the school building to also provide ongoing teacher support? And we are shifting away from just talking about adoption to only really talking about implementation, given where we are.
Can I just pick up on one thing?
Please do, yeah.
One of the things that Louisiana has, among many things, has done better than anyone in the country is this notion of telling the vendors to be better in certain ways, and then listening when we say, well, like, we can't really do that technically, or we don't, but can we try it this way or that way? And so that we can actually figure out how to make it better. So because it's government procurement, sometimes there's like vendors are over here, you have 30 minutes to describe a year-long math program, and then leave, and we're going to flip it, right? Rather than doing what they have to do in healthcare, which I know is also screwed up, but where the interoperability of these things, how one part flows to another, so like how our assessment can flow to someone else's materials in a way that works and is simplified for teachers. Like if we don't engage in these conversations, we cannot be of service. And I think one of the great things about Louisiana is basically the ability to have civil discourse as we're beating each other up. You just say like you can't possibly afford to do that. Like we will have to leave, or yes, we can do that, but it'll take 2 years. Or and so then these and it's everyone gets the same information. It's all fair, and that's going to work better over time to create something that gets through these challenges. And it's a very special thing going on in Louisiana. Very special.
David, final thoughts on your expectations for students in Lorraine and the challenges around implementation?
Yeah, so funny enough, this past Friday, I happened to be in my office and we got a call we had a bunch of teachers out for whatever reason. We had a stomach bug going around. And so I said, you know what, I'm going to change my day and I'm going to substitute teach. Now, at first I said, boy, what am I thinking? But then I actually did and had a great day. And it was actually just a really interesting day because it helped me see the complexities of what we're asking our teachers to do day in and day out. Right? So fifth grade classroom, bell-to-bell schedule. I think there was 30 minutes for lunch, but on Fridays, for whatever reason, I should have looked at their schedule. They allow kids to come up to a teacher's classroom and have lunch with them. So there goes the 30 minutes that I had during the day. But putting that all together, you think about what we're asking our teachers to do. And you start to realize that the day is rigorous in its own right. And so us as a district leadership team have to realize that we have to do a better job of providing the scaffolds necessary for them to implement whatever we're giving them well, whatever they're deciding on is important for them well, so that they don't have to think a lot about it. Because during the day, they don't have the time or space to do it. Yep. And so part of that means building out a school calendar that makes sense. So having professional learning experiences, we moved away from the term professional development because we as people, typically don't like the word being developed. So professional learning. So we built this professional learning schedule. So now instead of 1 day to implement materials at the beginning of the year, we have 7. And then every month we have a full day this upcoming year just for professional learning. And so this is our way of saying, okay, we realize your day is packed. We're not going to pull you out after school. We're not going to try to jam something at the beginning of the school day. We're going to have a dedicated day just to think about the implementation of strong curriculum and have conversations amongst your colleagues on what that should look like. So then when you go into your classroom, it's more automatic, it's easier to implement, and so less strain on you to think on your feet.
Great. We've got about 15 minutes. I wanted to make sure we have plenty of time for questions if you have them for any of our panelists. Oh, right here, Giselle.
So one of the problems that we face you're trying to install a high-quality curriculum in a completely moribund system in terms of the way assessments are done, the summative ways that assessments are done, the fact that you have a pacing guide, so you only have 3 weeks to teach X, and if Johnny needs 5 weeks, too bad for Johnny. All of these things that you're talking about that are the high quality curriculum are stopped by the way the structure is built. So as much as you try to cram, and you were saying in your district in Louisiana, in the state of Louisiana, they're very enthusiastic about the high quality, but they don't have time to do it. They don't go deep enough. Because if you don't have a competency-based system that takes care of the routine stuff, if you don't take 15 or 25% away of the work of the teachers repeating the same thing that all kids must learn, and if somebody's slow, then you take care of him on the side, you're never going to let them get to the really good stuff of high-quality curriculum.
So this is a classic problem. My colleague Bob Slavin, who I respect enormously, believes in interventions, right? Like in medicine, if you gauge the pill you swallow has X effect on the disease you have, the higher the effect positively, the more you should take the pill. The problem is there's a disanalogy. In education, whether the pill works, the degree to which the pill works, depends on 1,000 factors that have to do with the system. And Mark Tucker from NCEE, National Center for Education Economics, has shown that what makes Singapore, Shanghai, Holland, Poland, which is increasingly doing superbly in education, is not the individual interventions, it's that the entire structure is designed so that the interventions can actually do what they're supposed to do. And what is, again, Louisiana's doing, I think, better than almost anyone else, is paying attention to that system. So we're honored to work with Louisiana on a brand new assessment that instead of being summative at the end, find the main idea, which is a terrible way to test for ELA, by the way, we're actually embedding essay-based questions after each unit based on the text they've been reading. God, what a radical idea, right? But the challenge here is you've got to do both at the same time. You've got to make the interventions high quality, if we're thinking about a curriculum as a high quality intervention, and at the same time, you cannot close your eyes to the system. You've got to, at the same time, say, this is one piece, right, of a broken system. Where else do we have to work? So we have to work at teacher prep, right, and get the ed schools in Louisiana to teach, right, the guidebooks curriculum. We have to work at principal preparation, so they're curriculum leaders. We have to work at the assessment. And part of the deep challenge in the United States, frankly, is that so much of this is broken that we keep doing only the intervention and then being surprised when that isolated intervention doesn't have the big, right, aha moment that we hoped it would. There's no shortcut to getting each of these pieces to actually speak to one another. And that's the hard work that you have to do. We just have to.
Other questions? Yes.
Let's come.
So my question is around how do you operationalize where a child should be in a given day and not looking at intervention, but looking at acceleration. And when you think about competency-based, you're not just looking at interventions, but we're looking at deeper learning opportunities for children. So if Johnny is here at this particular day and he's already ready, he knows that standard. Why should you inhibit him by a pacing guide? And so how do you all envision operationalizing the implementation of this curriculum that will still give kids opportunities to exceed what those mandates are for that particular day?
I mean, I'm very curious to hear the panel. I'll just say one thing quickly from my own experience, and we're doing some work on this right now, is it seems to me more and more that the conversation around personalized learning and the conversation around high quality curriculum needs to be a single conversation. And my fear at the moment is that those are two very siloed conversations, and my pitch to you all would be in your own conversations to make sure that that's a single conversation being had, but curious to hear from our panelists.
Yes, I would like to give you a standing ovation for that comment. So yeah, I think one of the things that's occurred, right, that happens in schools where it's political, it's sort of personalization is the only way. It needs to adapt in order to do those things. Grade level is the only way, getting grade level content all the time. So if you give grade level content all the time and you can't go up from there, you're leaving a lot of children behind. And so just, yes, the combination of those things done well with tons of research about which recipes and dosages work is the answer, because there's so many powerful things that can happen when you have adaptivity in terms of getting information much more quickly and not wasting time. Adaptivity saves you time, right, by getting that information and getting the content where you need to be, or providing the information to parents in ways that other people can't. But exposing kids to grade level content is an essential thing for equity in our world, and the U.S. in particular. So they must become one. But I would answer that adaptivity. It's one of its strongest use cases is not for the kids from behind. It's to let kids excel and continue to excel, because we see about 20% of the kids in a classroom stopping and not going on because the content stays at grade level. Right?
I'm sorry, go ahead, David.
If I could underscore that a little bit. So the way that plays out in a classroom in Lorraine right now is that if a young person has met the expectation of the lesson, they're done, right? And we just stop. We figure, you know what, they have mastered the skill and there's no reason to extend it beyond what is possible. So I think part of the challenge has been for us, first, defining what we're saying is mastery. And so we've actually spent a lot of time this year moving to standard-based grading across all K-8 buildings so that we have very clear definitions of what each standard is expected to do to be seen as proficient. But then our next phase of that is saying, above proficiency, what does that task, what does that experience, what does that outcome look like for kids, so that teachers can then think and have time to dissect what is necessary to take that next level or next leap. But right now, it starts with that definition. It starts with what it should look like at grade level, and then expanding the vision for what it could be for kids. And that goes to the personalized learning platform, which says, I am a young person in 5th grade, but I'm reading on an 8th grade level, and this is the experience I can handle. Let's give it to them. But right now, we haven't even defined what that looks like at our local level.
I'm going to put tech-based personalized learning aside for just a second. I want to also be clear about what we do not mean by curriculum implementation. We do not mean that teachers are reading a script and doing the exact same thing for every student all the time. That is not what we mean, right? And so a lot of our teachers say to us, we so appreciate having the tools because it gives us the place to understand where to, as David said, where is the floor? How do we start? And if students have achieved that, you as the teacher have the freedom now to say, okay, I don't need to build my lesson for tomorrow. My lesson is built. Let me think about what I need to do with this student over here. Let me think about how to help this student over here. And how do I restructure my 90-minute ELA block to meet the needs of each group of children, given that my lesson is prepared for me already? And so I think the freedom that you are afforded as a teacher when you start with a high-quality curriculum gives you more flexibility to think about what to do with students who are ready to advance and how to help students who need support. The last thing I'll say is, per Rob's earlier point about our vendors, we do push on our vendors. And one thing we have said to our vendors is, now that we have the base curriculum, we want you to build in the scaffolds that help kids rise up to that level, and we want you to build the expansion that helps kids even surpass that level. And it will take time for the vendor marketplace to get there, but these are the kinds of things that educators can demand and vendors will respond with when you sort of drive the marketplace with expectations and money. And that's what we've done.
Other questions? Yes.
Hi, thank you for this. My name is Crystal, and I'm with the English Learners Success Forum. And we are focused on curriculum, and this is one question. I feel like high quality is, in our context, equated to more so standards aligned, right? And so you dig into some of it, and you always wonder, what is this mean for the students that we need to serve the most, including English learners, Black, Latino students, and really seeing what that looks like in the materials that were presented. And so I guess the question is, you know, how have you seen with the building of the curriculum, as it also being educative for teachers in this sense of some of these areas that we know we could support them better on reaching our students that need it the most?
David, I know you've had experience recently talking to students about these questions around relevance.
Yep. So that very question, as you were saying, I had an image of a young lady who approached me in our cafeteria at the high school and said, you know, Mr. Hardy, I'm in my history class and there is nothing in my textbook that says anything about me. She's a Latina young lady. She was just kind of speaking to what she was experiencing. I said, tell me more. She explained to me that the textbook that was in front of her still has the President of the United States identified as Ronald Reagan. That the materials that are in front of her still are relating to slavery as day laborers. So like the complexity of what our kids are now interfacing with and the reality of what they're experiencing sends a couple different signals to them. So if we don't have something for them that looks like them, sounds like them, shows them what is possible, they're going to have this other perception of who they are. And so here's Marie standing in front of me saying she wants examples of successful Latina individuals so that she can anchor her mindset around what is possible versus kind of seeing the rote historical, whether it's accurate or not, a material that is put in front of our kids routinely to say, here's what you need to know. And so that says, to Kujan's point, we need to push on our partners to create products that really meet our kids and understand where our kids are coming from and give them experiences to really build their self-esteem and understanding how great they are and the potential they can reach by seeing themselves in the materials they have.
So there's just one quick thing on, it's getting better. I mean, not everyone has Ronald Reagan in the, but the Council of Great City Schools with Los Angeles did something that's a little bit Louisiana-like, but where they basically called people together and said, you're not doing this well enough, you got to do it better, and they went through a very rigorous process. And same thing, instead of just rejecting things, they said, here's why we don't like it, here's what has to be better, here's what you're not thinking about. And they brought together other people from the Council of Great City Schools, the 75 largest districts in the U.S. And it worked, like sitting in a room and figuring out how to do it. And then a lot of people said, you people, you're crazy. We can't do all that, it's too hard and expensive. And some people stayed in. Those things will make the world better. And it will matter. You're going to start to see that coming out. It's a little bit more true that it's happening already in technology, because we can actually see with our technology that this group of ELL learners in third grade got this score, had this much time, this much usage, jumped out of the lesson after 5.5 minutes. We have a bunch of statistics on that. It's a little harder to do in print. We have both, but that stuff is getting much, much better than people currently understand, because it's not all out yet.
I would urge caution and thoughtfulness here, as everywhere, of course. Cultural relevance, and we have a whole big scheme on it on our knowledge map, is not the same thing as high-quality cultural relevance, which is what is so sorely needed. What Sonia Sontelisis at Baltimore was reacting to was the fact that the texts were not good texts. They were culturally relevant, but they were not helping her African-American students to have exposure to unbelievably rich materials by African Americans, Hispanics, whites, you name it. And I think we very easily, and this goes very deep politically into identity politics, into the whole question of old liberal universality versus right meism and everything in between. So this is dangerous territory. But we are convinced, because we've seen it all over the world, that when you have the opportunity to be multicultural in your sources, in your selection of materials, there is less than zero excuse for not having absolutely ecstatically interesting and rigorously academic material written by the best that there are. So, last point, people are told I must be relevant to my students. If young people were only interested in texts that were about them, then J.R.R. Tolkien would never have sold one copy of The Lord of the Rings, right? Rawlings would never have sold. I mean, students love the imagination. Mostly, if you have a really grim life, yes, you need role models to show you ways that are beyond that grimness, but you also want incredibly rich landscapes of the imagination. And that's what great literature from every ethnic group gives you.
So if I could add one other piece to that, because I think it's crucial, questions that we should be asking, right? We should be asking, who are the authors?
Right.
Who are the people that are talking about very important topics in history or otherwise, in literature or otherwise, and then what are they actually talking about? To your point, they could be an author that's talking about something in the African American community, but if it is about, police violence or other things, that it may not be the example that a young person in 3rd grade or 4th grade or 5th grade who needs a shining star, an example of what is possible, it should be reading or needs exposure to. So asking who is writing, what they're writing about, and then thinking about what outcomes you want to have for your kids and the experiences that you believe will make them a well-rounded individual to adapt to anything that they see out there in the real world. So giving them a myopic view of the world is not okay either. Right. I think it's the ability to adapt to many levels of the world that they were interfaces is crucial as well.
We're going to land this plane relatively on time. I want to thank our panelists. I'm sure they will hang around for a moment if you have other questions.
Thanks so much.